Welcome to the Successfully Unemployed Show. My name is Dustin Heiner, and I'm here to help you learn how to quit that JOB, that just over broke job, by investing, by having side hustles, by being an entrepreneur, basically doing everything possible to not work for somebody else because your boss is only paying you enough to keep you working without quitting, but not so much that takes money out of their pocket. So today I'm bringing on a super awesome expert. Her name's Jocelyn Diaz. She's here. She's going to show us how she became successfully unemployed and how you can too. Jocelyn, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me, Dustin. I'm excited to be here with you.
So let's jump right into it. How do you make money to provide for your family without working that JOB?
Yeah, so I'm a podcast host. I manage and create podcasts. I'm pretty much in the podcasting world, and that's what's allowed me to be home with my kiddos and just kind of provide for them in a non-traditional job pretty much.
I absolutely love podcasting. In fact, I have 3 podcasts myself. I have Master Passive Income, Successfully Unemployed, and then I have it's a fun one. It's more of like a labor of love. My brother and I, we actually watch movies. And since he lives about 600 miles away, we don't ever get to see each other. So we hang out and talk about movies that we watch and hey, let's just do it. He's a podcaster. Anyways, long story short, I love podcasting. It's so awesome. And then if you're doing interviews like this, you meet great people. And I'm so glad to bring you on. So what were you doing before you became a full-time podcaster and then getting that transition to where you actually made the leap into say, you know what, I'm going to quit and go full-time? Talk to us about that process.
Yeah, so I started about a few years ago when I was working at a sales job in Carnival Cruise Lines, like the typical go in, make your calls, get the sales, and come out. And it just wasn't for me. So I kind of started down the whole work from home journey, and I've had so many different types of work from home jobs. I used to be an ESL teacher online. I've done like less traditional jobs like Instacart and all of these like flexible jobs, and it all began when I had eczema, which is a skin condition, and I needed a way to figure out how to make it feel like how to make it better. And my kids had it as well, and the skin condition was just getting worse and worse. And I was always super intimidated by podcasting, and I was just like, you know what, let me just give it a shot. And I used podcasting to interview experts, health experts, to figure out how can I heal my eczema naturally. And luckily, it gave me the
That's
result that I
brilliant.
needed.
I
Yeah,
love that.
and that's why I love podcasting so much, because you can do anything with a podcast. You can learn from anybody in the world, experts. It's a beautiful thing that you're able to talk with anyone, and that's pretty much how it all started.
That is so awesome. I've never thought of a way of utilizing a podcast like this to actually get education. Like if you want to learn something, you're obviously learning how to defeat eczema or live with it or whatever it might be. That's awesome because you're getting experts, people who've paid thousands of dollars or hundreds and more than that, thousands of dollars to go to college to learn, and you're getting free education there. But let's say something like if you wanted to learn how to invest in stocks, literally just start interviewing the best stock people and pick
Exactly.
their brains. That's brilliant. I love that idea. And so you jumped into podcasting. Now, was that how was that when you started doing the podcasting? Was it just let me just start calling people up and saying, "Hey, can I interview on my podcast?" Like, what is the first thing that we need to do when we're saying, "Okay, I want to go this route of starting my own podcast," whatever it is? How should we go about outside the technical, like microphones and all that sort of stuff? That's stuff
Right.
easy to learn. But starting your podcast, what should we do to actually get started doing it?
So I think the first thing that's most important is, what do you want to get out of your podcast? Do you want to just, like you said, you have a super fun one that you just chat with your brother, right? I had a goal. I needed to heal. I need to chat with experts to know what to do. So I think that first step is like, why do you want to start a podcast? Because sometimes if you're a little bit confused, it can seem boring. It could seem hard. But if you're excited about it and you're looking forward to doing it, then you're gonna want to do it, right? So I think that first question is like, why do I want to start a podcast? And then you can start reaching out to people that are in that specific field. Because if not, it just gets overwhelming and confusing.
That makes a lot of sense. And I like having the end in mind first before you get started. Because, like, I'll give you an example Master Passive Income. That's where I have my podcast, literally teaching people how to do rental properties. My goal is like the end goal is to get people to actually invest. And I realize the only way to do that is to actually be teaching them how to do it. Same thing with Successfully Unemployed. My end goal was to show people and teach people that there are so many ways to quit your job. Like you don't have to be stuck in that boring job and then retire at 65 and your life is half over and then try to live on whatever you saved. It's just silly. There's so many better ways to do it. And so having that end goal in mind is a terrific idea. Now, let's say I want to start a podcast. I'm listening to you, Jocelyn. I'm saying, you know what? I have this idea of starting a podcast, and I know the route I want to go. What is the next step that I need to take to actually make that into like a actual process to interview people? Like, do we need to have like a year planned out, or do we need to start contacting people? Like, what is the next step after we know we want to do it? What do we do next?
Well, I think it's really important not to think too far out because that can lead to like starting to doubt, like, is this right for me? Am I, do I have enough experience to do this? So I think the first step is once you're excited and ready to go, just start taking action. So hey, you want to start a podcast? Great. Start to reach out to people. My favorite way to get guests on a podcast is to use social media. So I would say you're usually following people you already like, right? If you interact with them, even better. Start reaching out to them, DM them, send them a voice message. That's the best way that you can show them, hey, I'm not just copying and pasting. I am a human. Just send them a voicemail. Hey, I'm starting a podcast. I'd love to have you on. I love your work. Would you be interested? And go from there, right? Like just start taking those steps. But once you start seeing, hey, I can actually do this, you'll start to get even more excited and just keep going.
That's a great idea. One thing that I did, so when I was starting Master Passive Income, that's my second podcast. The first podcast was my brother and I, we wanted to get the jitters out of doing a podcast because my first podcast to now are like totally different. You'd be like, is that the same guy? Because I was so nervous and all that sort of stuff. Now I'm just myself. I don't really care anymore because I just feel at home. I feel normal doing it. So what my brother and I did, we liked the Walking Dead TV show. And so we just talked on the phone all the time and said, hey, let's start a podcast where we can, who cares if anybody listens? And we just did it. Just like you said, just took action and did it. And the first episodes were kind of rough and rocky. We were all scripted and everything. And by the end, we're just winging it. And it sounds so much better because we learned. We just took action and we started doing it. And then when we started our own podcast, like he teaches how to play poker with his podcast, and I teach real estate. And in doing that, we were so light years ahead because we've already done it before. Not saying everybody should do this, but I'm 100% with you. Literally take action. Like, don't let it sit by because you don't want to all of a sudden realize, you know what, life actually happens and I could do this later. No, get it done. So once we start saying, I'm going to start actively finding guests. Let me take a quick step back. Is the best way to do a podcast is interviewing people, or is there other ways to do a podcast?
Definitely, there's many ways to do a podcast. So that goes back to why you're starting a podcast. Because I needed to figure out how to heal. I wasn't a doctor. I didn't have any doctors in the family. So I knew I needed to interview people that knew what they were talking about. If I'm just starting a podcast and I'm the expert, I'm not trying to learn, then you can be the one that talks yourself, right? You can be the one that's sharing the knowledge. Or if you're in a journey where you're learning things, you say you're reading a book about healing, right? We'll stick to the healing side. You can use what you learn from the book to share it with your audience as well. So there's different ways you can interview. You can, be the one who's speaking and sharing the knowledge because you're the expert, or you can learn and share as you go.
That's great. And you know what's, I even learned that it's really interesting. There's even podcasts that are like story podcasts, like fiction podcasts. Run the gamut. Like if you want anything, more than likely there's a podcast, just like there's probably a YouTube channel for whatever it is that you want to do. Okay. So let's say we want to do exactly what you're talking about. I love the idea of being personal to the people that you want to interview. Literally be direct. Don't just spam them, and don't just like copy and paste, like you said, DM them, or really just be as personal as possible. It makes it so much better because I get pitches all the time for people to be on Successfully Unemployed. And usually they get charged. Like the people that pitch me, I charge them to be on the show because it's valuable to be on the show. You pitched me directly just as a person and really just explained how you like the show and all that sort of stuff, which made me like, I like this. Let's go ahead and bring her on. So it's so much better rather than my opinion. That's just me. I could be an outlier, but just the companies that actually say, hey, pay us, we'll pitch you to other people and get you on other shows. It's so impersonal. It's just cut and paste. And so I don't like that. But because you reached out to me directly, I was like, hey, let's do it. So we're reaching out to people and we're starting to interview. Is there a plan of not saying where we're supposed to host it, but like, should we literally get like 50 shows all recorded, then launch it? Or should we just go as we go? Like how do we make sure that we're keeping a track, because I think we have to post like once a week, or like you have to be regular about it. Like talk to us about the process of making sure that we have consistency, have audience that wants to actually go back and listen to us every single week. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, first things first, to be consistent. You want to be able to be a podcast like, hey, your listener knows every week or every other week they're going to, get some value from you. So I definitely think it's important. Start out with, a plan, but you don't need to have 50 episodes recorded. No way. I recommend you start out with at least 3 episodes so that your listener can have a little bit of a base to go from. And then from there on out, you can record on a weekly basis and just kind of go from there. And in no way do I recommend have a bank of podcasts, especially when you start. Don't worry about how many you have. Just do something that you can commit to and stay consistent with, so that you can build up that credibility that your listeners can rely on you to always, be there in a sense.
I did the opposite of what you said, and I got kind of burnt out. Like, so for Successfully Unemployed, I interviewed like 50 people, and I was leaking them out one at a time, and I got burnt out because I did so many interviews, like just within like a month span. And by the time I had so many that I kind of put it on the back burner on my brain, and by the time I was out of all the bank of, I was like, oh no, I got to do interviews, and I'm kind of out of like who do I? It was rough. I like your plan personally. If I were to do it again, I would much rather do it your way, because if I had a bank of 50, if you're doing one a week, if you record in January, that 50 is not going to be until like almost December, into December. That you interviewed them a long time ago, trying to reach out. Hey, I'm releasing your podcast now. Hey, that was a year ago. Like, what's going on? So I love that idea. Okay, so we're interviewing people. We're posting them once a month. Is there anything that we need to do to make the show get more traction, get more people to find us? Or is there any tips that we can have in that?
Yeah, so one thing I like to do is when you're looking into your guests, if you're going to have guests on your podcast, if there's someone who are more established, you can ask them to share your episode, right? Because if you're starting out and no one knows who you are, it's hard to kind of build that momentum. But once you start having guests on that have a bigger following, and you provide, a genuine experience for them, that they enjoy the podcast, they want to share it because they had a fun time too. That's how you start to get other people to come to your podcast. They share it, and slowly but surely you start to get different ears on it, and that's how you start to build the credibility of like your listenership growing.
Is there any other? I think it's a great idea. I'm actually horrible at reminding all of my guests when they actually get sent out. I probably should be better, much better at it. But is there any other ways to, because it's a great idea, anything else that we can do to boost our, not just credibility, but like listenership, like people finding out that we're actually there to listen to?
Well, I think it's smart to not keep all your eggs in one basket. So I think it's good to have guests on your podcast that you get them to share. Obviously, it's really important to be able to follow up with them and remind them that, this is going to go live. Even if you create them, like an image, take out all the hard work, create an image for them to be able to share. But even aside from that, you can do things like getting on other podcasts as well. That will, since your podcast, usually if you go on another podcast, it'll bring more people to your podcast because they're already in the whole podcasting world. But you can kind of spread yourself out across different medias, and do guest posts so that you can get a piece of a blogger's audience. You can go on YouTube and try to maybe get interviews with a YouTuber. And since we're in this digital age that there's so many different platforms that you can go on to, I think it would be smart start trying to get a little bit in the blogging, a little bit into the YouTube. That's a little bit more advanced, but I think it's smart for you to be able to at least start getting your feet wet with reaching out and partnering with people. Some people are intimidated by working with others to help each other grow, and really there's enough listeners for everyone. So collaborating and helping each other, I think, is really important, and being able to provide value for each other is a great way to kind of build up a podcast.
I think that's a great idea. I love being on other people's podcasts. Number one, you meet other people, but exactly, you're right that when you're on other people's podcasts, people that listen to podcasts listen to multiple podcasts. Like, they don't just stick with one and they literally listen to one. Same thing with like YouTube. If somebody's a YouTube watcher, like they watch YouTube, they don't just watch one guy and just keep listening to that, or one gal and just never look at somebody else. They do multiple. So getting on other channels is one of the best ways that I've seen explosions into my investing. Sorry, my real estate. So Master Passive Income is where I do with investing for Successfully Unemployed as well. So both these podcasts, when I go on other podcasts to share about whatever that is they want me to share about, and then I can plug my show, helps so much because so many people are like, oh, let's go check that one out. I like this guy. Or the people that don't like it, like, I'm not going to check that out. They just kind of pass on, which is totally fine. I'm not going to waste their time. Okay, so it seems like, yeah, my opinion, I'm just going to say straightforward, podcasts are so easy to start, so easy to do. I wholeheartedly recommend anybody, if you have any idea or a thought to do podcasting, absolutely. So it's really not hard to start podcasting, interviewing. What's the hard part in my mind is starting to make money from your podcast. How do you make money? What are the ways that we can make money? And like, where do we start in trying to find money as we are, putting out these podcasts?
Yeah, making money is definitely something that, a lot of people try to do with a podcast, but it's something that is more of a long-term game, so people give up too quickly. But for example, I have two podcasts, and my other podcast that was about the eczema, it didn't build traction for a few months. But during that time, I was still working on something as simple as ads, right? Having ads on your podcast, like through Anchor is how I started out. And with Anchor, you can have an ad in your podcast, and depending on how many listens you have, you begin to get paid for it. And that was something that I completely forgot about. And one day I looked and I was like, hey, I have $50. And it just started. Yeah, and it's something that you don't realize. Like, if you're consistent, that's the important thing about podcasts. You need to be consistent. If you're consistent with it, you can make it grow. So there's ads. You can also do sponsorships, which is pretty much you reach out to companies that fit your podcast and you pitch them like, hey, I have this podcast. I recommend to do it a little bit later on in your podcast so you can have a little bit more credibility and more listenership, so you can pitch them, hey, I have this podcast, this amount of listeners, I can get you in front, of your ideal client. And you pitch them, and that's how you start to kind of get your name out there. And if you get that sponsor, you negotiate a price and you start to make money that way. Or there's affiliates. There's so many different opportunities, as long as you're consistent and you don't give up when you get that first no, or you don't get paid quick enough. It's important to keep trying and keep providing that value, so everyone knows it's not just about the money, right? Like, you're actually trying to help people throughout the podcast.
That's great. So ads, sponsorships, is there any other way that we can make money with our podcast?
Well, you can definitely do affiliates, right? So affiliates is if you use a product, and I definitely recommend only recommending a product that you use. But they have an affiliate link, which is pretty much like if someone purchases the product through your link, you can get, a certain percentage of how much it costs. And you just mention it throughout your podcast, and you let them know like, hey, I just use this to, let's say I use this shampoo for my hair and it was great. Make sure you check it out if you're looking for the same thing. And if they purchase it, you get a piece of that. And another way is if you create your own product. All right, let's say you are the expert in playing the guitar, because I see your guitar. And you want to create like a simple download for them to be able to start, and you sell it. It doesn't have to be complicated, as long as you use your imagination and you come up with something that you can actually provide value. It can sell itself.
Those are great ideas. I love all those. And personally, the reason why I don't take on ads for either one of my shows or any of my shows is because I'm the expert. I want to sell basically I'm the ad. Like everything that I'm teaching is to point back to, hey, if you want coaching, if you want courses on any of this stuff, I literally have it for you. So go ahead and use my stuff. Like, I'm here for you. And but on top of that, it's a huge win-win. Like, if somebody needs that, I'm there for them. If they just want to consume the content, totally fine. I love it. Go ahead. Like, this is the reason why I do it, so people can actually take advantage of it. Okay, so Jocelyn, what type of money can we expect? Let's say we've been podcasting, like, I'll give it more time. Let's say a year. We have 50 plus episodes now. We've been doing it for a good while. Should we expect some more listeners, and with more listeners, more money? So I know there's a lot of variables involved, but what should we look at as far as downloads and then monetary value? Like, if we're just doing sponsorship and ads, is there anything that we could look at for like as a baseline, hey, you should hopefully reach this and maybe reach that?
If you're starting out and it says, say it's your first sponsorship, right? Let's just focus on sponsorships just because there's multiple ways. If you're starting out and you know you're a newbie to sponsoring, I don't think it's smart to pitch, $1,000 for 10 episodes simply because you're learning. There's a learning curve to it. So I'm more about gaining experience so that you can then like get the confidence from it. So for example, my first sponsorship, I did it for $500 and it was for, I believe, five to 10 episodes. And it's the process of the negotiation was, hey, this is what I can offer. At that time I had about 10,000 listeners, and I was able to pitch, you're going to get over 100 listens per episode, and I will have you in the middle of my episode and at the end. And this was simply because I didn't know any better, right? Like I'm sure I could have pitched more. I'm sure I could have done it differently. But what I think it's important to understand is do what you can and don't try to, be something you're not. Don't try to oversell, because then if you can't deliver, that's you. That's on you. That's on your name. And you're not gonna, create that lasting relationship with that specific sponsor. So definitely the price point can vary. The more listens you have, the more audience, the more credibility. Definitely raise that price, no doubt about it. But if you're starting out, don't be afraid for that first sponsor to just kind of make it a learning process. And then the second time, you're gonna be able to do it with so much more confidence, and then, kind of gain credibility through there. What I think is smart is find a company or a business or a product that you would use or that could benefit your listener. So I'm
Oh
starting a
yeah.
travel podcast. I think, right, let's say it's for RVs. We were chatting about that. And there's solar panels for the RVs and you use them yourself. You reach out to that company. Hey, I use these myself. I think you're a great company. I'm starting this podcast. I have this amount of listeners. This part of the world listens to me, which is your audience. And if you show them that you are going to bring them customers, and you have, a platform that you can share their name, and you kind of make it all about them and how you can help them make money, then you just reach out and email and follow up. Don't forget to follow up. Create a spreadsheet, write the emails, write everything, your contact everything, and keep it organized so that you can follow up, because those follow-up emails show like, hey, I'm not just randomly emailing you, I'm actually following up. And I think it would be a great, partnership.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Now, is this something that you can do yourself? Like all this, for everything from the starting the podcast, doing the podcast, reaching out to sponsors, finding people to interview, all that sort of stuff. Is that something you can do yourself, or is it something that like I should hire somebody? Like that's a thought that comes to my mind is like, how much time does this all take?
It does take time. So you got to weigh that out, right? Do you have the time, or do you need to do this quickly? Do you have the money to hire someone? I think a lot of what holds people back is the tech side of podcasting. So if you're super intimidated and you don't even want to deal with it, no question asked, hire someone if you're able to afford it. But if you have the time, you don't want to spend the money, 100% you can do this, even if you're that person that says, I am not techie. Because I used to be that person, and now I manage podcasts, I create them, I launch them. Like, it's all you're able to learn everything you need to, because realistically podcasting is not complicated. It's just, if it's new, no matter what it is, you got to learn how to do it. So if you want to do it quicker, definitely hire someone to help you out. If you don't have time, hire someone. But it's not because you can't do it yourself. It's just a matter of prioritizing what's more important to you. Time, are you willing to trade that in for money? So as long as you can kind of gain clarity on what exactly you want to do, then that should help you figure out if you want to do it yourself or get someone else to do it for you.
It's a great idea. I personally 100% agree with you. Anybody can actually do all this stuff yourself. It's literally not hard. It's not like it's there's work. Don't get me wrong, there's work, but it's literally not hard. Once you learn it, you're like, oh man, this is so easy. Why did I do this a long time ago? I should have started it sooner. And so one thought comes to mind is if somebody's going to do a podcast and they're nervous, they want to do a podcast, but they've never done one before. And they're kind of thinking, you know what, I want to do it, but I feel like I'm an imposter, or, like the imposter syndrome, that terminology comes up. Is there anything that we can do to help ourselves to not have that imposter syndrome or bust through it and say, I'm just going to do it?
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes back to being the expert and knowing that you're not the expert. I think the one thing that gets us with imposter syndrome is trying to be something that you're not, right? And it's not so much not having confidence that you can do it. It's more, right? Like, let's say I tried to come on and create a podcast and saying, I'm going to show you how to heal your eczema, or I'm going to show you how to travel with your family. I know myself, I am not there yet. That's where I want to be, right? So if you come into it knowing that you're gonna help people learn as well, that imposter syndrome is not gonna show up. If you come in trying to be something that you're not, that's when imposter syndrome, doubt, having no confidence, all stuff starts to build up. But it's really all about like doing what you can to just help people, right? Just learning and sharing what you can and just being honest and being your authentic self.
That's a great idea. And it seems like if you are trying to help people, at least it's come across in my shows, the more people I help, the more it comes across as genuine. Like
Mhm.
I'm literally here to help you, and more people stick around. That's one thing I've seen. Is there a way that we can make sure that people that listen to us continue to listen to us and don't just, say, oh, I've listened to what I want and move on? Is there anything else that you could think of that we can do?
I really think it's, well, like you mentioned before, like with the whole ads thing, that you don't do ads because you have your own stuff that you're trying to sell. I think it's also important, don't do ads just to make money. Don't be spammy, right? Like some people just, you get on a podcast and there's several ads throughout because they're just trying to make the money. I think if you're not genuine and you don't actually have your listeners at heart, like that you actually want to help them, it shows. And people don't like people who are not trying to help them. People don't like people who are just trying to make money off of them. So I think, as long as you always have your listener in mind and how you're going to help them, I think that's where it all comes down to. Because if you're coming from a good place, it shows, and if you're not, it shows.
That's a great point. I find that the more people that I help and serve, the better my life gets and better their life gets. So I completely agree with that. Okay, so Jocelyn, you have so much great insights. Let's jump into the rapid fire round. Okay, rapid fire round. It basically questions are short, but your answers don't have to be. So first question is: you've given us so much great advice. Is there anything we might have missed? Any tips that you can give us as we are starting our own podcast, other than just start? Because everybody says, "Oh, just start." That's easy. We know we should just start. Anything else that we might have missed that we should know?
If you're ever looking to learn something, then that's why you should create the podcast. So it's not so much just start, because yes, obviously just start, like get it done. But if there's been something that you want to learn about, something that's been on your mind and you're just passionate about, that's why I think you should start a podcast. You should only start a podcast if it's something that matters to you, so that you can actually grow from it and use the platform to benefit you and other people.
Now, what is one bit of advice you would give your younger self that you've learned now and you apply it to your life? But what's one bit of advice you would give to your younger self?
Don't let change intimidate you. That's definitely held me back a lot, including podcasting, including travel, including like just so many things. Change is something that I feel like we're shielded from growing up. And it's something that we can't control. It's gonna happen no matter what. So try to embrace it, and usually pretty cool stuff comes out of change. So if you can embrace it instead of push it off and fight it, I think it'll highly benefit.
I love that. I agree. I love change, not for the sake of change, but for efficiency or getting better or
Mhm.
serving more people. I love when I change because I get better. So I love that. Okay, what is one nonfiction book that you would recommend? It could be business or life or anything like that, but what's one nonfiction book we should read?
I am not much. I just became a reader, and I have to say that the books that I've read are fiction. But let's say, so actually, the one of the ones, it's Believe It, Jamie Kern Lima, I think it is. Jamie Kern Lima, Believe It. It's about, like her experience as a woman in entrepreneurship and creating her own business. And it's actually just an inspiring story of how she did what she did, which is create a huge company. And she defied the odds of being a woman in a quote unquote man's world.
Very cool. Believe it. Got it. Okay. Last question. What is one tool, one app, or it could be a piece of paper and a pencil? Like, what do you use on a day to day basis that we should look into using?
I definitely use Google docs to create a plan for my day. And I just follow that thing every single day so that I know exactly what it is that I'm using. I used to use pen and paper, but I realized I don't always have a pen and paper with me, but I do always have my phone. So staying organized by using just a simple blank sheet on the computer, which is the Google Doc, and just kind of staying on track throughout your day has been life changing and has helped me make so much more progress that way.
That's great because I'm looking at the screen. It looks like you have post-it notes behind you. I thought you might say put some post-it notes and utilize this,
You know,
stick those everywhere.
I do love them though. I will say those all those posts back there are things that I always want to remind myself, but I tend to forget if I don't write it down. So if you ever have something, that's a good one. If you ever have something that you sticks to you, hits home, and gets you motivated or excited, write it down and put it somewhere you know you're gonna see it. Because that's what that is back there.
That's great. Jocelyn, I really appreciate you coming on. I know people are going to want to listen to your podcast. They're going to want to reach out to you. How can they find you or how can they listen to you?
So right now, what I'm working on is a travel podcast. So my podcast is called I was going to give you my eczema podcast. The travel podcast is called Exploring Family Travel, and it's all about helping families begin traveling, even if they have children. Because a lot of people think you can't travel once you have kids, but that is not true. And I am on a mission once again to learn how to do it myself and share with other people as well. So you can find me on iTunes and all the different podcasting platforms, or on Instagram as well at Exploring Family Travels. And you can reach out to me if you ever have any questions. But it's honestly a fun place to learn more about traveling with your family. So if that's what you're into, come check us out.
That's great. Jocelyn, thank you so much for being on the show. You give us lots of great insights. So I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Dustin. It was so great to be with you.